Recording in progress.
Good evening and welcome to the Town of Corte Madera Planning Commission for Tuesday, November 12th. Please call the roll.
Commissioner Bendel. Still, no problem. Commissioner Kenny
Here.
and Chair Chase.
Here.
And Commissioner Beshoyer and Vice Chair Rizzo are absent.
Thank you. Please join me in a salute to the flag. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. At this time, we always open the meeting to public comment for that which is not on tonight's agenda. So if you have something to say, you have 3 minutes to do so from the lectern or from online. So that's it. Is there anybody here that would like to make a public comment about something other than what we're going to talk about? No. All right. Claire, do we have anybody with their hand raised?
No hands raised online.
Okay, then we'll close that open time and we'll go directly to our new hearings. And we have a business item from Amy after that. But tonight is accessory dwelling unit ordinance amendments. Public hearing to consider proposed ordinance amendments to Corte Madera zoning ordinance regulations related to accessory dwelling units, ADUs, and junior accessory dwelling units, JADU. I gather we're going to have a dual presentation here tonight, but we're in receipt of a comment letter from Cal HDF. And I don't know whether you want to explain that after the presentation, Anne, or before. Okay, great. Thank you.
And that public comment was saved to the website, and there's also copies in the back of the room for anyone in attendance.
Okay, thank you.
Good evening, Chair Chase and members of the commission. Tracy and I will be doing a joint presentation this evening. A lot of the slides are similar from the last meeting, so we may go over them a little bit quickly, but if you have any questions, please. So this evening, the commission will be considering amendments to portions of Title 18 of the Municipal Code to repeal and replace Chapter 1831, which is the chapter that regulates accessory dwelling units and junior accessory dwelling units in Corte Madera. The Planning Commission will be making a recommendation to the Town Council. The town last updated its ADU ordinance in 2020, and that update was done to comply with state law in effect at that time. Since 2020, there have been numerous ADU bills, and it requires additional changes to our ADU ordinance. The draft ordinance includes 3 different types of changes. The first are to comply with state law. The second are clarifications of existing regulations. And third are some policy considerations. And the majority of changes proposed are to comply with state law. The draft ordinance was included as Exhibit A to Attachment 1. And a red line version was provided as Attachment 5. This slide shows the location of the ADUs that have been permitted since 2020. And again, this was the last time that the town updated its ADU ordinance. A total of 63 ADUs have been permitted, and an additional 4 are currently under review. Approved ADUs include a mix of new detached structures, a conversion of existing spaces, including basements and accessory dwelling units, and there are also junior ADUs as well. The size of the ADUs approved range from 182 square feet to 1,200 square feet, and the size of the JADUs range in size from 162 square feet to 497 square feet. And by law, a junior ADU cannot exceed 500 square feet. A list of all of the ADUs that have been approved was included as Attachment 3, and this map is included as Attachment 4. The prior presentation to the Commission on October 8th included a summary of bills that were adopted that went into effect on January 1st, 2023 and January 1st, 2024. This presentation, we're not going into those bills, but if there are any questions, we're happy to answer them. Since the last Planning Commission discussion, we reviewed the new bills that are going into effect on January 1st, 2025. And there are additional changes proposed to comply with these new bills. The first bill, Senate Bill 1211, this increases the allowable number of detached ADUs on a property that's developed with an existing multifamily building. A current state law limits detached ADUs to 2, and the proposed legislation would increase that to 8 detached ADUs. And the number of detached ADUs cannot exceed the number of existing multifamily dwellings. So if there's a property that has 5 apartment complex, then the maximum number of detached ADUs would be 5. The next bill is Assembly Bill 2533, and this extends the ADU amnesty program to cover unpermitted ADUs and JADUs that were built before January 1st, 2020. And current state law creates an amnesty program for ADUs constructed before January 1st of 2018. So this removes the requirement that the unpermitted structure be brought up to current codes unless the unpermitted condition is a health and safety condition. The Planning Commission just had a study session on October 8th to go over proposed changes. The Planning Commission had some questions and comments, and based on feedback that we received, there was a new objective standard that was added that requires an ADU constructed above a garage to have the same roof pitch as an existing or proposed primary house. And also staff created flow charts to show the process of when an ADU permit would be required and what the various standards are. And those flow charts were included as attachment 6. And these flow charts are in draft form. They'll be finalized after the ADU ordinance is adopted. Staff also held an ADU community workshop on October 17th. The workshop was well attended. There were approximately 10 people who attended in person and approximately 20 people that participated online. The goals of the workshop were threefold. The first goal was to provide an overview and receive feedback on proposed changes to the existing ADU regulations. Also was to provide an update on the pre-approved plan programs. And lastly, to promote resources available to homeowners. As part of the workshop, there were survey questions that were asked. Questions were asked at the beginning of the workshop, and also midway through, 2 questions were asked to gauge attendees' thoughts on ADU permits and when those should be required, and also on detached ADUs in a floodplain and if the height should be increased to allow for additional height. The workshop video is available on the town's website, and it will continue to be a resource to homeowners. Following the workshop, the town did receive a public comment from the owner of One Verona Place. This comment was included as attachment 7 to your staff report. The draft ordinance requires that an ADU greater than 800 square feet meet the setbacks of the underlying zoning district. And this commenter requested a relaxation of standards for ADUs that exceed 800 square feet. The property is zoned R1B, and the rear yard setback for R1B lots is 50 feet. The R1B lots are shown on this map as the lime color. Also highlighted are R1C lots, and those are shown in green. And the rear yard setback for R1C lots is 100 feet. So state law requires a jurisdiction to relax setbacks if the ADU is 800 square feet or less. However, we're not required to relax setbacks for ADUs that exceed 800 square feet. However, a local jurisdiction may elect to have relaxed setbacks and other standards. So there is a discussion of this in the staff report, and we're happy to answer any specific questions. And as part of deliberations, the commission can discuss if there's interest in making any additional changes to reduce setbacks for these larger lots. Now I'm going to turn things over to Tracy, who's going to go over proposed changes to comply with state law.
Thanks, Martha. Good evening, commissioners. As Martha said, the majority of changes to our existing ADU ordinance are necessary in order to comply with recent changes to state law. One of those changes is related to the allowed number of ADUs on a given parcel. Our existing regulations allow a maximum of 2 units on a property with an existing or proposed single-family home. In other words, the only way to have the 2 additional units on the single-family home is to construct a detached ADU with a JADU within the primary residence. The proposed ordinance would allow a maximum of 3 units, which would be an interior ADU within the residence, along with the JADU and the new detached ADU. And this change is based upon an updated interpretation by HCD, by one of the provisions of California Government Code. The updated HCD handbook has clarified that the allowed number of units is any combination of the units shown on the left. And furthermore, as HCD is reviewing local jurisdictions, ADU ordinances for compliance with state law, they are commenting on the number and the type of ADUs that a homeowner is allowed to construct. And that's consistent with the ability of homeowners to construct a maximum of 3 units. On the right-hand side of the slide here, the interior ADU, JADU, and detached ADU. An allowed number of units on a lot developed with a multifamily building. Within the existing space of the multifamily building, owners can construct a minimum of 1 interior ADU or up to 25% of the existing number of units, whichever is larger. And they can also construct up to 2 detached ADUs. And Martha talked about this earlier. Recent state law that's effective January 1st, 2025 will increase the number of allowed detached units on a lot with an existing multifamily building from no more than 2 to a maximum of 8 detached ADUs. The number of detached ADUs could not exceed the number of existing units on the lot. So Martha gave the example of a lot developed with a 5-unit building could have up to 5 detached ADUs. Detached ADUs for a parcel with a proposed multifamily building, state laws continuing to say that those are limited to 2 detached ADUs. The draft ordinance includes changes to maximum allowed height for ADUs to ensure consistency with state law. Our existing ordinance allows an attached or detached ADU to be a maximum of 16 feet in height, and an ADU constructed over a garage to be a total of 25 feet in height for the combined structure. Consistent with new state law, a detached ADU that's within a half mile of a major transit stop may be up to 18 feet in height. An additional 2 feet in height is allowed for such units to provide for a roof pitch that's aligned with the primary residence. It's worth noting that there are no single-family parcels in Corte Madera that are within a half mile of a major transit stop as it's defined in Public Resources Code. Additionally, a detached ADU, state law allows a detached ADU on a lot developed with a multifamily, multi-story building to be up to 18 feet in height. And lastly, probably the most significant change to the allowed height for ADUs is for attached ADUs. Current regulations allow them to be 16 feet in height, and new state law requires us to allow an attached ADU to be up to 25 feet in height, but we do not have to allow it to exceed 2 stories. This includes those that are constructed above a garage. Staff is also proposing to allow an increase in height for detached ADUs in the floodplain when they're required to be raised pursuant to FEMA requirements, and we'll cover that a little bit later in the presentation. ADUs are well known for their flexibility in terms of many regulations, and one of those is setbacks. As you are aware, an attached or detached ADU may decrease the side and rear setbacks to a minimum of 4 feet. In these cases, the ADU is limited in size to 800 square feet. Any ADU that's larger than that needs to meet the setbacks of the underlying zoning district. And our existing regulations state that an ADU is not allowed to reduce the applicable front yard setback. But to comply with recent state law, an ADU is allowed in the front yard setback if that setback would preclude construction of an 800 square foot ADU. In other words, an ADU is only allowed to reduce the applicable front yard setback if the applicant can demonstrate that there is no other area on the lot that is feasible for construction of an ADU. In addition to standards related to height, size, and location of ADUs, the existing ordinance includes objective development standards related to lighting, landscaping, windows, and grading. And following the October 8th workshop, 2 new objective standards were added related to ADUs that include a balcony or a deck, as well as the roof pitch for an ADU proposed above a garage to match the primary. Staff has applied objective standards to all types of ADUs, regardless of their size. Based on ADU state law, objective standards other than height, size, and setbacks cannot be applied to the statewide exemption ADUs. A statewide exemption ADU is ADUs that are interior ADUs, JADUs, or detached ADUs that are 800 square feet or less in size. Objective standards can only be applied to ADUs that are not exemption ADUs. In other words, we can apply these objective standards only to all new attached ADUs and ADUs that are greater than 800 square feet. So you'll see that reflected in the draft ordinance. We've also taken the opportunity to add 2 new definitions for statewide exemption ADU and statewide exemption JADU. Our existing ADU ordinance limits the number of bedrooms to a maximum of 2. HCD discourages this restriction because it could be seen as discriminatory towards family size. So staff is recommending to remove the limit on the number of bedrooms. Existing regulations state that a JADU must be created within the walls of an existing single-family residence and must include an existing bedroom. However, state law says that a JADU must be created within the walls of an existing single-family residence, and that any enclosed uses within the residence, such as an attached garage, would be allowed to be converted to JADU and should be considered as part of the existing residence. After the October 8th workshop, staff sent the draft ADU ordinance to Scott Johnson, who's the director of the ADU Center. Mr. Johnson recommended several minor changes to ensure the ordinance was consistent with state law. Staff reviewed those recommended changes with the town attorney, who concurred with those recommendations. The proposed changes are shown on this slide and are described in greater detail in the staff report. And we've also updated the ordinance to because the state law has rechaptered and renumbered California government code related to ADUs. So we've had to update those code citations throughout the ordinance. The second category of changes to the ADU ordinance are to clarify existing regulations. And specifically, the existing regulations do not establish a setback for a detached garage with an ADU above it. And so since state law allows a detached ADU to be set back 4 feet from side and rear property lines, staff is recommending clarifying that an ADU above a garage is required to meet the rear and side yard setbacks for the underlying zoning district. We've also taken the opportunity to clarify that the square footage of a new detached garage that is constructed to provide parking for the ADU above it is included in the total size of the ADU. And I'm going to turn it back over to Martha for the following slides.
The last bucket of changes are proposed policy amendments and considerations. The first change is to review of the record. This was added to the ordinance when it was adopted in 2020. And this standard establishes a process where an individual can request a formal review of the record. And in requesting the review, an individual needs to assert that the town didn't appropriately follow the ADU ordinance or that an objective standard was not appropriately applied to a ADU. This request is required to be filed within 10 days of an ADU permit being approved, and it establishes that the town manager or his or her designee will be the reviewer and that any decision made is final, and it also establishes a fee of $300. Since the ordinance was adopted and this was put in 2020, no individuals have requested a review of the record. And by removing this particular regulation, an individual would still be able to request to review any ADU plans or applications or meet with staff to ask any questions. And staff doesn't feel that a formal process is necessary, and especially since the majority of ADUs that are approved are the statewide exemption ADUs. So for those ADUs, we do not send out a courtesy notice, and there's no ADU permit. The next change is related to the height of ADUs in the floodplain. New detached structures in the floodplain are required to be raised so that their finished floor is 1 foot above base flood elevation. And through the implementation of the ADU ordinance, staff has seen that there are challenges with individuals meeting the 16-foot height limit when their property is in the floodplain, because it's challenging to meet that 16-foot limit and also raise the structure to comply with FEMA. So there have been several applications that initially came in as a detached structure in the floodplain. And since they were unable to meet this height limit, they modified the project to be an attached ADU that was not raised. So the draft ordinance includes an additional height standard that would allow for taller ADUs in the floodplain, and it would allow for an increase of an additional 1 foot of height for each foot that the structure was required to be raised to comply with FEMA, up to a maximum height of 20 feet. And for each foot of increased height, there would be a requirement for an increase of a 1 foot rear yard and side yard setback. So current state law limits rear and side yard setbacks to 4 feet. So if there was an ADU in the floodplain that raised the structure 4 feet to comply with FEMA, then it could be up to 20 feet. And then the rear and side yard setback would be 8 feet instead of 4 feet. Slide. This shows an example of this. So this, again, assumes the property is in the floodplain. And in order to comply with FEMA regulations, the structure needs to be raised. And the maximum height is based on the amount of feet that the structure is required to be raised to meet that 1 foot above a base flood elevation. So a 20-foot height would only be allowed if the structure was required to be raised a minimum of 4 feet. And in this case, if it was a 20-foot structure, instead of having 4 foot side and rear yard setbacks, the setback requirement would be 8 feet. Staff did get feedback from the attendees of the workshop on this proposed regulation. And of the 11 individuals that provided an answer, 10 were in support of this proposed change, and 1 person was against it. Another proposed policy change is in regards to ADU permits. So an ADU permit is the first of a 2-step process. ADU permits are currently required for all attached ADUs, regardless of size, for detached ADUs greater than 800 square feet, and for ADUs that are created from accessory structures if the structure is increased by more than 20% of the existing floor area, or more than 150 square feet, whatever is larger. And when an ADU permit is required, there's an application fee that's associated with that, and the planning department reviews the permit for compliance with the standards in our ordinance. And then as part of the process, a courtesy notice is sent to everyone within 300 feet. And then once the ADU permit is approved, then at that point, the applicant submits a building permit application. As Tracy mentioned, there are several types of ADUs where we cannot require an ADU permit. We cannot require an ADU permit for any detached ADU that's 800 square feet or less. For ADUs created from existing area within a home or for junior ADUs. So this was something that the commission discussed at the October 8th meeting, and there wasn't really a clear consensus. So it was something the commission asked to kind of rediscuss. And what staff is recommending is to require ADU permits for attached ADUs only if it's greater than 16 feet in height. State law does allow attached ADUs to be 25 feet, and staff feels it's appropriate for these taller attached ADUs to still require an ADU permit. They also would be required for any detached ADUs that are greater than 800 square feet, and for ADUs created from accessory structures if the structures increase by more than 20% or more than 150 square feet. And since 2020, the town has processed 8 ADU permits and 1 is currently under review. So the majority of ADUs that we review kind of fall into the category of statewide exemptions because they're detached ADUs that are under 800 square feet. So this isn't a permit that's processed at high frequency currently. And when an ADU permit is not required, then an individual submits to the building division with their application. And as part of the process, planning is still reviewing that application for the same things we would be reviewing it for if an ADU permit was required. So we're still verifying that the ADU complies with the ADU ordinance and the various objective standards that we're allowed to impose. We did ask a question at the community workshop about ADU permits. The question listed the types of ADUs that we could require a permit for. And those 4 different types of ADUs was attached ADUs less than 16 feet in height, attached ADUs greater than 16 feet in height, including a garage, ADUs in the flood zone that are raised and allowed to exceed 16 feet in height up to 20 feet, and none that only building permits for all ADUs. This was a multiple choice option, so individuals could select multiple answers. A total of 8 individuals provided an answer, and you could see it's pretty split. Of the 8 people, 4 thought that ADU should never be required. It should just be building permits. And there was a mix of people thinking attached ADUs greater than 16 feet should require it, and also that attached ADUs in the flood zone that exceeds 16 feet should require an ADU permit. So we tried to strike a balance with what our recommendation is, but if the commission has feedback, we're happy to hear that. These next few slides show pictures of ADUs that have been constructed. This slide shows 2 detached ADUs. Neither of these required an ADU permit since they're both were detached ADUs that were 800 square feet or less. So with these ADUs, they submitted directly to the building division with a building permit. The next 2 pictures are pictures of attached ADUs, and these did require an ADU permit since they were attached to the primary residence. With the proposed change that staff is recommending, these ADUs would no longer require an ADU permit since the size doesn't exceed 800 square feet, and since the height does not exceed 16 feet. And the last 2 are pictures of ADUs that did require ADU permits, and staff is recommending that moving forward, these still require an ADU permit. On the left was an attached ADU that's approximately 900 square feet, so it exceeds the 800 square feet that we're proposing. And then on the right is an ADU that was constructed above a garage, and this exceeds both, it's greater than 800 square feet and also exceeds 16 feet. Another change is related to the window standard. There's currently a window standard that requires clerestory windows of when an ADU is located within a certain distance to a side or rear property line. The existing ordinance does not state that doors are required that a glass door is not required to be a solid door. So we're proposing that in instances when the windows are required to be clerestory, that any door would be required to be a solid door. And then Tracy also mentioned this, but there's also a new standard that requires a balcony and deck that's constructed as part of the ADU to meet the setback requirements established within section 1824050. And the section was recently amended as part of the larger design review ordinance update that was recently before the commission. And a slide outlines recommendation. There are 3 options available to the commission. The first is to forward a recommendation of approval to the town council to adopt amendments to portions of Title 18 to repeal and replace Chapter 1831. Option 2 is to provide direction to staff regarding amendments to the draft ordinance, and 3, to direct staff to return with additional information and analysis at a future meeting. And that concludes our presentation, and we're available for questions.
Okay, thank you, Martha and Tracy. You guys have put together a phenomenal amount of work to come up with this over the past year. It's really a lot to deal with. And we'll get into commentary about that. But first I'll ask the commissioners if they have any questions for you. Margaret, do you have anything you want to ask the staff?
I don't.
Okay, thank you. And Daniel?
Relative to a reduction of the rear yard setback for these large lots. I think the person who wrote in and requested that it be changed from 50 feet to 25 feet. I looked at that subdivision. He had said that there were 10 lots zoned that way, and there's 7 in that area. Where are the other 10? And what would you say about making a variance for the rear yard setback?
There are 2 lots zoned similarly to Verona Place that are near Marin Country Day School and the Robin Drive. And there is 1 lot at 10 South Way, which is the end of Sausalito Street. That's zoned similar to Verona Place is R1B. I think we have a slide showing this visual. So we have the Bill Grant property is R1C. So Verona Place is kind of the center right, the 7 lots all touching each other in the lime green. Those are R1B, and then 10 South Way is kind of second from the left there. That's 1 single family home and ADU is developed on that property. And then the Bill Grant property is far left. That's R1C. Other R1C lots, I think that is the Fairview area. And the end of Meadowcrest, they merged together. There's R1C that is adjacent to Sonora Way and the water tower. That's at the bottom of the screen. And then finally the R1C that's at Marin Country Day and above Robin Drive.
So in staff's opinion, in these R1C, R1B, would you think that reducing the rear yard setback to 25 feet would cause issues with neighbors or other technical issues?
These are all very large lots, and as written, our suggestion would be to allow a reduction to 25 feet in the rear for larger ADUs when the lots are over 1 acre. Most of these are over 1 acre, but as written, it would apply to residential lots. The most common rear yard setback is 25 feet. So a larger ADU built on an R1 lot would need to meet, larger than 800 square feet, would need to meet the required rear yard setback of 25 feet. R1A, if it's less than 1 acre, as written, as suggested by staff, to address this issue, would need to meet the rear yard setback of 35 feet. Unless this change was made, then that person in R1A would be able to reduce it to 25 feet, but only if their lot is greater than 1 acre. And And so that what we're trying to do there, I think, is craft it in such a way that it's more evenly applied, if you will, to only to those lots that have substantial area and distance from neighboring properties.
Is there anything in the town's regulations that specify a minimum bedroom size? A minimum bedroom size?
The building code does, I want to say it's 70 square feet. I don't know exactly what it is, but the building code does have a minimum bedroom size. Peter's nodding his head. He actually know the answer to
We
that.
have talked about that before, and you're right, it's like 70, 80 square feet, something like that.
Can you fit a bed in that size? Okay. Um, so, as I understand it, staff is recommending that a permit's only required for over 800 square feet, or if it's exceeding.
Yeah, so for the ADU permit, our recommendation is an ADU permit would be required for attached or detached ADUs that exceed 800 square feet. Or for an attached ADU, if the height is greater than 16 feet in height, or if it's in the floodplain and they're increasing the height more than 16 feet, that we would require an ADU permit in that application as well.
So if even the other types of ADUs are not required to do a permit, but you review the plans anyway for consistency with the state statute, what are we gaining by the permit for the other conditions?
Really, the big change is when there's an ADU permit, we send out a courtesy notice to everyone within 300 feet of the project site to notify them of the proposed ADU. Individuals are limited in what they can comment on. You can only comment on the ADU that it doesn't comply with the objective standards. You can't, say you don't like the ADU because you don't like the way it looks. So it has to be, you're very limited on kind of objections that can be raised. So that's really the main difference is there's the courtesy notice with the ADU.
But the staff review would be basically the same?
Correct. The staff review is the same.
If there's an attached ADU in the floodplain, can they increase the height of the ADU to meet the floodplain requirements, but not increase the height of the primary residence?
That would be evaluated by the Public Works Department through their normal procedures for work in the floodplain, which is whether or not the ADU is a substantial improvement to the existing dwelling. And a substantial improvement is where the cost of construction for your project equals or exceeds the value of the existing structure. So they could be required to elevate the house with an attached ADU. They could elect, I suppose, to elevate only the ADU. If it's attached, it could be up to 25 feet in height. Irregardless, the FEMA requirements would apply to the entire structure if you're attaching something to it.
So generally substantial would be a percentage of the primary residence, would relate to that?
For example, they'll look at an appraisal from a licensed appraiser, and that provides a value of the land and a value of the structure, including the depreciating
Okay.
cost of improvements. So the value of the structure, and then you have the construction cost estimate provided from the applicant or from their contractor in some cases. And if that construction cost estimate, including looking back at the last 5 years projects, you add them all together because it's cumulative. If that's a substantial improvement, meaning if that cost of construction of this project plus the last 5 years is 50% or more, the value that you've got on that appraisal, then that's a substantial improvement.
So if they were to determine that they couldn't go ahead with the ADU unless they also raise the elevation of the primary residence, can they do that with the current state regulations?
I
We have had few attached ADUs that demonstrated it was not a substantial improvement. So the cost of the ADU project was less than 50%. So they attached the ADU to the existing primary house, and they were not required to raise either the existing home or the ADU. And in some cases, we've seen individuals change their project from a detached structure, which requires it to be elevated to meet FEMA, to an attached, because we look at attached structures differently. We look at it in regards to this, if it's a substantial improvement and if it meets the 50% threshold.
And I'm going to interject. Are you asking if there's anything restricting lifting the house, or do they have to lift the house?
If the building department determines that you have an 800 square foot house and they're building an 800 square foot ADU, and the existing house is in the floodplain, so they're doubling the size of the square footage, but they decide only to raise the attached
Right.
ADU and not the existing house. Can the building department deny the ADU because it's a substantial improvement, it's substantial improvement, and therefore they would have to raise the house as well?
So if it's determined to be a substantial improvement, they have to raise both the existing home and the ADU. If it's determined not to be a substantial improvement, they're not required to raise any, but they could elect, as part of the construction of the ADU, to elevate that, although it would not be required.
Doesn't quite answer my question, but that's okay.
If I may, I think we wouldn't deny the permit, but they would just be an extra requirement to raise the home. So, but it's a really individual situation based on this calculation for the property itself and then how much is actually being improved. So it's kind of hard to answer without a very specific situation, but it wouldn't be a situation where there would be a denial of the ADU permit. It would just be either a request to raise everything above the flood elevation. That's the only real impact that would happen.
Could someone build an ADU on their property if the access, both vehicle and pedestrian and utilities to the ADU, was over an easement of somebody else's property?
It would depend on the language of the easement. If they do not have the right to access their property over that easement, then it would defeat the application. They have to have access. But again, it would be a case-by-case determination depending on the nature of the easement.
That's it, Peter.
Okay. But it's an interesting question. So if the easement said, yes, you have access across our property with an easement, then the answer is yes, they can build it.
And then I would assume that the setback, say front yard setback in that case, would be based on where the property line is, not where the easement originates, say in a public street.
In some cases, most cases, it's from the property line. The setback is from the property line, but most easements wouldn't allow you to construct anything in it. So you could say, I can only need to be 4 feet from the front property line, but there's a 10-foot easement. So you have to be 10 feet for that reason.
Yeah.
Okay. Ian, would you care to explain this letter from Cal HDF to us, please?
Yes, Chair Chase, I'd be happy to. I'm not familiar with this organization. I assume it's a litigation nonprofit. But much of what they say in here is true. Some of it, though, is not. For example, their first couple of paragraphs on background, both the statewide exemption, we are allowed to impose objective standards on both the statewide exemption ADUs and the ADUs that we approve pursuant to a permit. They're limited what we can do, but the general statement that they make that we cannot impose any additional standards is simply incorrect. Separate sales, we do have to allow separate sales under narrow conditions, and I think it's been amended to reflect that. The ordinance. It is not, and then if the commission decides to forward this with a recommendation for approval to the council, I suggest that that be one of the caveats, is that it be amended to allow separate conveyance under the narrow circumstances of Government Code 66341. The foundation requirement, the ADU laws are not a model of clarity. We are allowed to impose architectural standards on one type of ADU and development standards on another type of ADU. What those two phrases mean, we could debate, but we don't have to, because the definition does, in fact, as they say, refer to mobile homes as constituting a type of ADU. And I think that implies that the foundations that are used with mobile homes would also be, we'd have to also approve that foundation. So we've discussed this. And again, I think modification of that language would be appropriate to tack on to any recommendation that you forward to council. Christmas Tree Hill is the most difficult, for obvious reasons. There are very sound policy reasons, as has been voiced to staff by the fire marshal, for not allowing additional density in that area. It is true that where there are residential uses permitted, we are supposed to allow ADUs. That's the general rule. And normally I would be leery of anything that says no ADUs at all here. But this is a public safety matter, and I think we can justify it as a development restriction on that basis. I can't promise you that HCD would agree with us, but I don't think they've spoken clearly on that point as of yet, not in the context we're talking about with Christmas Tree Hill. Impermissible parking standards. They're not very clear, the ADU laws again, on parking standards applicable to the 66323 statewide exemption ADUs. We clearly are allowed to utilize another provision that provides for parking requirements. It is less clear that those require that those provisions apply to 66323 units. However, again, I would call it a development standard. If HCD disagrees with our using that standard, they will tell us. And I think that's all. Yes. If you have any questions, I'm happy to discuss further.
I do have one. Dan, do you have any regarding that?
Not at this time.
Okay, Margaret.
I'm wondering, before we passed anything, and we've just been in the discussion phase, how did we send this to them and say, what do you think?
No, but I suspect they keep tabs on this thing, judging by their names, by the name of the outfit. They seem to be tracking housing actions and looking for lawsuits, my guess. So California has so many laws that we are a very ripe garden of potential lawsuits.
You have a question?
Okay, Dan. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah,
Margaret.
so under the permissible sale, what are the certain circumstances? And then how would that work? They would have to create a separate lot in order to, and what would be the requirement of the size of that lot, and the boundaries of that lot?
I'm sorry, I apologize.
Okay.
If you give me a moment, we can come
Sure,
back to that
sure.
perhaps.
For staff, I think that under the impermissible foundation requirement. If it's not a permanent foundation, then it becomes a mobile home park. And that would change the definition of the location of such a structure, right? You'd have to have it designated as a mobile home lot. Is that correct?
We have had a few HUD approved mobile homes. The two ADUs on Paradise Drive was that. And then as part of the process, they affix the unit onto a foundation, and it's a different, Tracy may be able to better explain
It's somewhat described in this letter from HDF. It's a non-traditional foundation, so it's a jack system really, and then they have all these piers that they set the unit down, and it's open. It's not a perimeter foundation, it's open.
Okay.
Do some sort of enclosure around the base of that to screen it from view. And it's described in this letter as built on a permanent chassis and designed to be used as a single family dwelling with or without a foundation when connected to utilities. And that's what we're seeing, the HUD approved manufactured home type of foundation system.
All right, it blurs the traditional definitions of foundations in a way that seems to say, yes, you can do that. Put a home, yeah. So ADUs and prefabricated homes have changed the whole definition of what you can put on a lot, right? By just plunking it down on piers. And that's good enough, right? Rather than a perimeter foundation and all that.
I think a good example of what's not a foundation is the trailer. Or
Yeah.
on wheels, the tiny home on wheels that you can tow to different locations would be an example.
Right, okay.
Not a foundation.
And, or did you have something else?
Well, we're still waiting for Ann,
Yeah.
but, yeah, I guess the question is, what's the definition of permanent foundation?
Yeah, let's not drive down that road too far.
Well, I have a question about that. On another angle, isn't that a problem for health and safety? In an earthquake, just goes, shh.
My understanding that these do meet
Code.
California seismic
It's
code requirements. And they are plan checked by our building department, like any other ADU. And the Housing and Urban Development provides a approved design that's stamped by HUD that comes in with the application. So they've approved the design as well.
Would you like me to speak now to Dan's
Please.
question?
Yeah,
please.
Okay. So we are in 66341 of the California Government Code. The key feature is that the ADU in question has to have been developed by a nonprofit that has certain specified purposes. There has to be a restriction on the use of the land in the form of a recorded contract between a buyer and that nonprofit. The property as a whole has to be held as a tenancy in common. That's what resolves the issue of subdivision versus non-subdivision. There has to be a repurchase option that requires the new owner to give the nonprofit corporation the right of first refusal. And there are a number of affordability restrictions that would also apply. There's more detail if you would like it, but I think those are the main points.
No, that's very helpful. Thanks. So if we were to change the wording, it would be something like, except when consistent with government code section, blah, blah, blah.
Exactly what I would recommend.
Okay.
What she said, right? Right, okay. I'm gonna say, let's open it up to public comment unless we have something else. There's a gentleman here and I don't know if he has public comment for us or he's here to listen. Okay, well, thank you. So still open. Is there anybody online that has a hand raised?
There's one hand raised online. I see Brian. I am going to allow you to unmute Brian. You should be able to unmute now.
Did that work?
Yep, we can hear you.
Okay. This is some specifics of, but can I provide a very quick brief?
Brian, you have a poor connection.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Buddy.
Maybe try again if you can, Brian. If you're not able to, we can't hear you right now, Brian, but we can also take your comment if you want to email us at the public comment email or at PL Counter. Both those are at cortemadera.gov.
No, you've got him unmuted and yeah, we can't hear him. So
Yeah, sorry about that, Brian. Go ahead and email us if you can. Thanks.
all right, Brian, with that said, we'll look for your public comment to the counter or to public comment. And we'll come back to that if it turns up. So I'll ask Claire again later here meeting. But I'm going to take it back up here and ask for commentary on this from the commissioners. I'm going to preface it by saying this is feels like we have little choices in it, but you've laid out the fact that there are few choices. Now we can, I guess, add ideas to this or thoughts about it. So Margaret, do you have anything that you feel would be additive to this or discuss?
The only comment that I have is the department was recommending that the formal review should be eliminated. And I think that a formal review is a good idea, only in that people need to be heard in every opportunity that they possibly have. And $300 is not an unreasonable amount of money if people are feeling really strongly and just want their opinion on the record. And as I said, I think that given the state of how imposed this whole thing feels on a community that isn't used to having things imposed upon it, I think that any opportunity for someone to let their opinion be known, and if they're willing to pay $300 to do it, I think they should be allowed to.
So where does that stand with and comport with state law?
So correct me if I'm wrong, Ann, but there's nothing in state law that would preclude us from having this review of the record included in the ordinance.
That is correct. However, I would note that it would be simply a matter of seeing if the application checks the boxes, the objective standards boxes. So it might be an exercise in frustration. The applicant might find where we've made a mistake, but generally speaking, I'm afraid it would be an exercise in frustration for the resident who wants to oppose the project.
I think that could be explained at the outset when they want to say something. If they want to continue, I think they should be given the chance.
And can I also add to that, the review of the record is really a more formal name for something we already do without a charge. So if someone for any project has issues and wants to talk through things and review the record, building, planning, whatever it is, the team will work with them and walk them through the decision, walk them through any issues they have. So it, just from the staff perspective, our recommendation is to remove it primarily because we're doing this for free in other areas. So it doesn't make a lot of sense to charge it for this.
I do understand all that. I just think that if someone feels that strongly and they're willing to pay $300 and they understand the explanation that's given to them, I think they should be able to do it.
So what you're saying, Margaret, is that someone who objects or has an issue with an ADU that's where you're wanting to have that ability to comment. Is that right?
Well, there was a recommendation that you were making.
Yeah, so the existing ordinance has a code section that establishes a process where a homeowner can request that the record be reviewed. And the request is made within 10 days of a determination being made on an ADU permit, and the cost is $300. And then it establishes the process where the town manager, his or her designee, reviews all of the information that's part of the record and essentially evaluates if the objective standards were applied correctly. So the section was 1831-120. And the red lines show being struck out. But if the commission chooses to, that can be reinstated in the draft that's brought before the town council. And if you want to see the clean, without red lines, attachment 2 is the existing ordinance and has the language, and it is in section 1831-120.
Okay, so historically then, the idea to encourage the ADU application process and lighten that process for applicants does not, if this is out, that doesn't change notification of neighbors, or does it?
It would not change the notification for projects where there's an ADU permit. Those would still continue to have a courtesy notice to everyone within 300 feet.
At that point, what would the purpose of notification even be?
I think the main point is probably to make them aware that someone's going to be building something in near them.
You were close to saying something, Tracy. Yeah.
I'd say the purpose of the notice is to answer some of those questions that would otherwise be asked when it's under construction, for instance. And some of these, what staff is suggesting requires an ADU permit is those that are larger than 800 square feet or more than 16 feet in height. And those are, I think those would have a more significant impact than what we cannot require the ADU permit for. So I think what we're trying to do is make the application known, since it's larger than what state law requires us to approve with just a building permit.
So, okay. I just want to clarify, Margaret, your thought about it, so that it was about having neighbor or commentary on a proposed ADU. So, and it wouldn't change whether this is in place or not in terms of.
It's just access to give an opinion.
And they have that, but they were charging $300 for that access, and now you're not, essentially. So
That would be re-access.
yeah, but that doesn't
Or
change.
recheck. No, it doesn't.
Yeah.
And they need that explained, of course. They should be aware that it's useless, basically. That's the
Well, I
wrong
think
word, but
Depending on where the commission wants to go with this, we can leave it in and just remove the cost
and
associated
that's
with
what
it.
I would recommend, that we just leave it in. The other thing I want to say is that even checking the boxes, mistakes are made. If someone thinks a mistake is made, they should be given an opportunity to say, would you just look at this again? And it's worth $300 to me for you to look at it again, because I think you made a mistake. That's all. Nobody is perfect in approving these things either.
Well, Amy's generously decided to remove the fee. There won't be a challenge.
Really?
Right.
Yeah, if the commission wishes to keep that process, we can leave it in. We are in the update phase of our fees. And this is an unorthodox fee. Our fee consultant actually brought it up and asked what it was, because it's not something in other jurisdictions that occurs. So it is something that we would work with an applicant or a neighbor on for free anyway. So I don't see the need to call this out as a specific fee within the ordinance itself. If it becomes an issue, we can always create some guidelines after the fact to help that
If what
process.
becomes an issue, the fee?
If we yes, if it becomes too expensive, for instance, that we're doing these all the time, then, and we have to revisit it, we can, but the cost itself doesn't need to be in the ordinance.
Thank you. All right. Dan,
Uh, I guess I could go either way on the fee issue. On the permit issue. So I'm curious what you think, Peter.
yeah,
I guess, given the, updated ordinance has been submitted, I would go along with, the 25-yard setback for lots over an acre. And I think we could delete section, 183107G, which is the foundation one, because that's going to get covered by the building department in any case, I think. And so those are and the separate sale, as long as it's in accordance with government code section 66341. So those are the two or three things I would make a recommendation for.
yeah, okay. I'm not seeing anything else other than those things. I think that, this is total commentary here. I think that town, residents will be surprised by what can be developed on one of the multifamily dwelling sites. And if you took an apartment building that's behind the post office back there along the park, if the lot's big enough, they'd be able to add a number of ADUs to those lots right there and go up and do a number of things with those. So,
Yeah, the ADUs would be limited to 18 feet in height and they need to maintain at least a 4-foot setback. But yeah, if there was a significant enough area behind a building, you could kind of line it up with.
right. And you've not had anybody yet in any of these ownerships sticking their hand up in the air and saying, "Ooh, this sounds great. We want to do that." That's a quality of life assurance thing, I think. But we're really restricted by state law here. We can't push back on this at all. I'm hearing. Yeah. So, I agree with, Commissioner Kenny about those things and that, Ann's, quoting of that statute would qualify as a number in the state law that we would ask to be inserted into this, into the ordinance. And there's a number for it. We could call it by other names, but we'll leave it as a number. So,
Can I just make another comment?
yes,
Okay. It just strikes me as a little almost I don't even know the word for it. But at the last paragraph of this letter, it talks about being a nonprofit and the mission is to access housing for Californians at all income levels. And with all the restrictions they've imposed now, there's not one sentence about making some of them an opportunity for lower income or people who work in the community or teachers or firefighters or anything like that. They've imposed all this, which we have no choice but accepting, and they say not one word, yet it's their mission to encourage that kind of housing. It just doesn't seem right. My comment.
yes. Well, and I think Ann's assessment of that organization, is appropriate for this purpose, right? They make money in ways that we don't like. So, okay. Claire, do we have Brian sending in an email to us with comment?
So yeah, Brian did send in an email. It reads, This is somewhat outside the specifics of this discussion, but can planning staff provide a very quick brief on what the current limitations are with regard to ADUs in this very impacted neighborhood, given its difficult access, parking, and density issues? Thanks, Brian. I'm not sure exactly which neighborhood he's referencing.
This is Brian Brown, which I happen to know. He lives on Christmas Tree Hill.
I'm okay. Staff, take it away. I don't understand what he's asking for.
Understand that either.
Yeah.
Currently, the draft ordinance limits the number of ADUs in Christmas Tree Hills.
Yes.
Christmas Tree Hill. Staff is not recommending that be removed from the ordinance. So the Christmas Tree Hill is broken up into different capacity districts, and a certain number of ADUs are allowed within each district. Most of the districts are at full capacity. So there are not a lot of districts that currently have room for more ADUs within Christmas Tree Hill. So staff is not recommending any changes to these existing regulations.
Understood. Okay. And his commentary was to explain that? Yes. Okay. Got it. And I think we'd all agree with that, right? We don't want to increase that. Okay. So where we are with this is it's time to decide to make a resolution to town council about this. And we have three things that we've decided to add to this, which was to leave in 18.31-120 without fee, so that they can get into a review of the record without paying money to do so. The foundation requirement that is in there was fine, right? That we don't need to do anything with that.
I think the suggestion was to remove the permanent foundation requirement since they need to comply with building codes.
Right. And
that is section 1831.070G.
so just to revisit that, commissioners, do we want to follow that recommendation or leave it as a permanent foundation?
So
Margaret.
we have a choice.
Yes.
I say permanent foundation.
Yeah.
I guess coming back to Anne, I think you thought that was something that we could or should delete.
I'm not an expert on mobile homes, but if requiring a permanent foundation means that you can't have a mobile home as your ADU, then I think it's problematic. Again, I think the building code is the best place to address this issue, and I assume that it does. Again, it's outside my experience.
So the ADUs that I've seen placed on these foundations are, to quote the staff here, they comply with building code, and they're strapped down, bolted down. They're really quite secure. So I don't think there would be any harm in removing the foundation requirement, because they're fairly bulletproof, and building code will define that. So if we take that out, that just means that building code defines how it gets done. And it will be meeting code. The third thing was 18.31-070 about the separate sales, and Anne has a code number for us for that.
6341.
Okay. So that's three things we've got.
Did you cover the setback changing from,
I did not. No.
I'm in agreement with that. Is there any other?
I don't have a disagreement.
Okay.
So that's where we stand with those four items then. So
There's actually one additional change that staff would recommend to address another comment in the letter related to their parking comment. So for section 1831.030F, staff recommends adding at the end, except as explicitly allowed by state law. So this subsection currently reads an ADU that meets the criteria of subsections A, B, C, or E of this subsection shall not be required to comply with any other development standards. So we recommend adding except as explicitly allowed by state law. And this gives us the ability, if we can require parking for these ADUs, to require parking for these ADUs.
Okay, I'm just looking for that in your red lines. There it is, 18. Your red line's 18.31.110, right? That's different. Parking in the red line ordinance.
Yeah, so there'd be no changes to the parking section. This would just be a change to, this is under the ADU permit required. And the letter is essentially asserts that an ADU that is an exempt ADU does not need to apply with any development standards. So we want to clarify that we believe we can require the parking standards apply when parking can be required.
All right, I'm not quite sure how to say that, but we would say then that 18.31-030F would remain requiring parking if it complies with state regulation then.
Proposed change would be at the end, except as explicitly allowed by state law. So it would read, an ADU that meets the criteria of subsections A, B, D, or E of this section shall not be required to comply with any other development standards except as explicitly allowed by state law.
Okay. So that's a tag onto the end of that sentence.
Commission have a preference on where the setbacks for reducing the rear yard setbacks for large lots over an acre be added? Is there, or do you want to direct staff to find what we think is the best location?
Development standards.
There's an existing setbacks related to allowing the front yard setback to be decreased. So maybe we could revise 1831.080D, which is the setback standard, and create two separate subsections, one for front yard setbacks and then another for rear yard setbacks for larger lots.
All right, so that would become like an F or something in there.
I think we'd keep it as D, so it'd be 1831.080D, and it would be setbacks, and then there would be number 1 would be except as otherwise provided in this chapter, an ADU shall have side and rear yard setbacks of at least 4 feet. And then we'd add, we'd work with Ann on the right language, but we'd add another subsection that clarifies that ADUs greater than 800 square feet can reduce rear yard setbacks to 25 feet in R1A, R1B, and R1C lots if it's an acre or larger. You can fine tune that language before the council meeting.
Yeah, put that up on the screen. I'm just kidding. Okay. So we have to give you some direction here. We have to say we're gonna make a motion with an ordinance. But there are clarifications here that you guys are gonna fine tune outside of what we say here, and then you're gonna pass that on to council. Right? Okay. So to restate this, then we've got the first item, leave in 18.31-120 without fee. The foundation requirement gets changed to include the mobile home definition there for 18.31-070.
Pardon me, point of clarification. I thought the idea was to remove that requirement and basically defer to the building code.
Okay. Yes, 070, okay, right, G, I see it. Yeah, that we would take that out. Okay. And then the code section 66341 gets adopted as the permissible sale language or ADU sales. And the setback that it comes 2 bullet points is 18.31.030F.
We're requiring permits but no fee,
Right. Well, no fee for
800 or less. Is that-
we're talking about that section that's review, which is at the end here, it is 18.31.120. That's page 16. There you go. You're looking at it. So it's that $300 fee that comes out of that. So the review of the record stays in, and we just do it without a fee. Okay. So I don't know if we want to restate all that or
We have to.
you know. um, We had those 4 things we just talked about. And I think that your understanding of it and your agreement with it, Margaret gets it and is in agreement
Yes.
with it. So in lieu of us asking for a motion restating that all again, can we just vote and say aye or?
Vote to adopt the recommendation with the added provisos that the 5 changes stipulated previously will be included.
Thank you. I make a motion to adopt ordinance number. In order to town council, of the town council to the town council of Corte Madera, adopting amendments to Title 18 of the Corte Madera Municipal Code to review. To repeal and replace chapter 18.31 accessory dwelling units, including the alterations and changes referred to by the chair to be incorporated as this goes forward to town council.
Well said. Margaret, you second?
I second.
All right. Then we can vote and we can all say,
Commissioner Bandel,
Yes.
Commissioner Kenny,
Yes.
and Chair Chase.
yes. Okay, thank you for the help and assistance in getting that done. But we have one more item for Amy to tell us about, and that's the work plan for 2025.
Yes, thank you so much. This is the time of year when we really reflect on the work that's been done in 2024 and start thinking about next year's work plan. And the work plan is something that is reviewed and directed by the town council. But we also want to give opportunity to our boards and commissions to provide input. And so we weren't sure if we were going to have a meeting in December. So I wanted to make sure to bring this forward now. I know we're missing a couple commissioners, so I'll follow up with them to see if they have any suggestions as well. And so this is informal, just an opportunity to discuss what we're proposing and to hear your thoughts as well. And really appreciate the patience of our audience member for being here for the whole ADU ordinance as well. Next slide, please. So to start, I think we want to start by looking at our accomplishments that have happened in 2024. Within your packet, I did include the full staff work plan that the council directed in earlier this year. And so there were quite a few things related to the community development department, specifically planning, who you have the whole staff here tonight. And so I just wanted to walk through some of the accomplishments, many of which you were included in as well. The design review ordinance went through its final workshops and hearings and was officially adopted this year. And included in that was also a streamlining for homes within our flood prone areas to be able to reduce the design review requirements and streamline those opportunities. There was also an adoption of our multi-jurisdictional hazard mitigation plan. This happened at the town council. It was not legislative, so it did not go through your commission. But that was adopted and is a requirement of our of state law and our safety element to receive funds related to disaster preparedness and recovery. And then your last meeting, you recommended an amendment to our safety element to recognize the adoption of that document. That will be moving forward to the council next week. And then also the council acted on a repeal of our building ordinance that required all electric. And this was an issue because of a court case that basically said that we could not require all electric for our buildings. So that had to be repealed. As part of that effort, we did adopt building reach codes. And so those are in effect now, and we're doing public information on those. We also adopted an ordinance to allow parklets, which are the outdoor restaurant areas, which Martha worked on, which was actually also not a commission related item and is more of a license that was under our public works department, but included many design attributes, which is why planning took the lead on that. We've also been working behind the scenes to digitize public records. Much of this is done by Tracy, actually, and it's been a really big job, especially with the move to town hall and trying to get a lot of our paper moved to a facility who can scan everything and then make that available through other means. And that's still going on because we still have some of those in the basement. And then, of course, our new town hall and the move, which was a lot of work, and then really making sure that our town hall included everything we needed to, and it's working very well. We're very happy to be here. And then, as I noted, we are updating our fees for planning, building, fire, public works, anything related to our development process. So that fee ordinance was started and will be going on through probably February, March is when we're looking at going through an adoption process. So I'll make sure to update you all as we move forward on that effort. And then also there was a new state law a few years ago, SB 379, that required local jurisdictions to instantly permit solar. And so that we actually just implemented. We had a deadline of September 30th, and I think we made it by one day. So that is actually online and ready to go. So you can get an instant solar permit, or your contractor can. And then also we've been working on an engagement effort related to our climate adaptation planning, and really trying to work specifically with our shoreline neighborhoods on next steps related to flooding in those neighborhoods. And so that effort concluded and we reported that out to town council and are moving forward on a lot of those next steps. And then another effort that was happening behind the scenes is our code enforcement team has been sending letters to property owners who had expired building permits to notify them. And so many of those folks have come in to remedy those situations. So that was also on our staff work plan. And next slide, please, Claire. And then there's a whole slide related to housing element implementation and other related housing accomplishments. And so many of these things you all have been aware of, but earlier this year, the Emergency Shelters Low Barrier Navigation Center ordinance was adopted, as well as a reasonable accommodation ordinance. There's been a lot of work on the fair housing, and a lot of that has been outreach to the community. Also, we've been working with different entities around Marin County on, and we've also done a council proclamation on that. As you know, tonight we talked about the ADU Center and the partnership that was forged for the jurisdictions in Marin County. So that has been a really big help for us writing the ordinance and then also gearing up for the pre-approved ADU plans, which will be coming next year. We've also been working with Home Match to create a program matching people with available rooms in homes. And they have been at most of our outreach events alongside us. And so it's been great to have a contract with these folks to really help us with that piece of the housing element implementation. I can't remember if we announced this, but thanks to Martha, we did receive a grant of $75,000 for one of our housing sites for technical assistance. This is from ABAG, Association of Bay Area Governments. And so we're actually setting up kickoff meetings in the next month or so to really start looking at how to best utilize that grant. And then also our ADU ordinance, which tonight you provided us a recommendation. And then we also had the adoption of fees related to SB 9. And looks like I have ADU ordinance on there twice. So it's very important. And the same with the SB 9 fees. All right. And so just when you're thinking about the work plan considerations, obviously a lot of our work plan is related to new state law. So you'll be seeing some of that in our recommendation about what's coming forward, but we continue to keep up to date on required ordinance changes, new emerging legislation that's needing to be addressed. Every few weeks we hear about something new that we didn't know about. So it's always changing, and we'll continue to keep up to date on that, even if it's not within our stated work plan. The other thing to consider is that there are some efforts that are multi-year. So things that were started last year are going to continue into 2025. And that is just the ebb and flow of things. Things do not start in January and end in December. And then also just being thoughtful about the resources we have and the capacity of staff. So we're going to suggest some things and we want help prioritizing these things. But we also, at the end of the day, want to make sure things are realistic and are things that we can actually accomplish. And then also consideration of community goals and vision. We have a number of adopted planning documents. So we also look at those to see what hasn't been implemented, what hasn't been started, what's next on the horizon for instance, climate adaptation or other things. Next slide, please. So this is a little bit of a review of what is on our 2024 work plan. So some of these you'll note are complete and we've talked about as part of the accomplishments, but we do have a fair number of things underway right now. So we've talked about some of these things. I'm just going to touch on the things that we haven't discussed. One is enhanced noticing. So this effort was to establish enhanced public noticing standards for large projects. So we are starting to do some research on what other jurisdictions are doing. What are the instructions that we provide to applicants to do that large format? And so we'll be coming to you all with more of a study session just to understand what your suggestions are and what the community thinks about what the threshold is for large project and what kind of sign should that look like. And then the other thing, our short-term rental ordinance has been adopted and implemented. We have approximately 5 short-term rental applications or short-term rental operators. And we, based on the conversations we've had with people in the community, we have a handful of things that we can see wanting to change. So we will be going to the council in, we're targeting January for a study session, just to do an annual review of this program and to really get input on what other things may need to change. So this one is also another tricky thing where it's not actually under your purview because it's not in our zoning code. It's actually a separate license. So we'll likely want to talk with you all as well to see what input you have related to the short-term rental ordinance. The other thing, and I will say it's about the only thing we have not started, is an ordinance related to our outdoor gyms. Just like the parklets, we have a few businesses that operate outdoors that started during the pandemic and have continued. And our goal is to create some ordinance around some standards around what they can do. Those have been operating very well with no issues and have been really complying with building, fire, any requirements that we've asked. We've had no complaints. So this has really gone to the bottom of our priority list because it's not a pressing issue at this time. And I think that's all I was going to discuss on this slide. Going to building. Building division has been very busy on multiple things. One it's not on here are the REACH codes that were developed and adopted and implemented. And that was actually not on our actual work plan for this year. It was on the climate action work plan that came out of the climate action subcommittee. And we also implemented the solar permitting, as I noted, and then are heavily involved in the fee update. Next slide, please. And then there's items that don't fall completely within planning or building, but are still on our work plan nonetheless. One is related to tree canopy and coverage. This is a recommendation that came from our climate action subcommittee. And it asks us to consider updates to programs and ordinances to maintain and increase tree canopy and coverage. We have not specifically started on any ordinances or programs, but there has been work on the tree list. And I know we've talked about this in past meetings with your commission about having a set list of acceptable trees for Public Works, Beautification Committee, all the like things. So that's been underway and has been under discussion among other tree ordinance considerations of possible changes that could be made. Among other things that we haven't discussed is the foodware ordinance. That does touch planning a little bit, but that has been also starting to be implemented in July of this year. So that will be continuing into future years. And then also the town workforce housing. And this is asking to explore opportunities and options for the development of housing for staff to address long-term staff recruitment and retention needs. This is top of mind for most of our town hall team. And there are some things that are underway and being investigated, but nothing to be able to report today. So we'll probably have more of a report out when we talk about this with the the council at their work, at their study session. And next slide, please. So I'm just going to talk about the potential additions to the work plan. So obviously we have some things that are going to continue from the last year. And so these are things that we're proposing as potential items to add. And then of course, anything else that you would like us to consider. One is the development of an economic strategic plan. So one of our roles is to support businesses and making sure that we are removing barriers to their success. If there's things that they need in any building, planning, sanitation district, anything, making sure that they have that clear path and good instruction, and then being able to support the small businesses, the large businesses, all those things. And the other thing that's come up with our team has been the code related to code enforcement and the fees and penalties. This isn't something that will likely touch our zoning code, but is definitely something that impacts planning and your commission, is how we assess fees and penalties for those that those code enforcement issues. The other thing is related to a bill from, I think it's been over 10 years now, SB 743, which really shifted the way that we look at traffic and how we plan for circulation. So it's somewhat technical, but it's really a shift from level of service to vehicle miles traveled. So it's really shifting the way we look at congestion. Used to be congestion was bad and we would plan our way out of congestion. Now it's more acceptable and we're looking more at uses and their spurring of new trips. And so looking at land use differently to be able to make sure that we're taking into consideration the trips and the distance that certain uses may trigger. So that has already happened to CEQA, and we just need to create a policy around this and be able to provide guidance to traffic consultants or others that are working with our policies related to circulation. So very technical, but will be quite an effort that we'll need to undertake eventually. The other thing is we've had a lot of new emerging equipment related to heat pumps, and a lot of the new structures related to heat pumps are happening in side yards. And our zoning code really doesn't allow those in a way that makes it very easy. So we want to be able to explore our zoning code and the setbacks to be able to alleviate some of that friction we've had, to be able to allow some of these energy efficiency upgrades for homeowners. And the other piece is that we, as you know, as part of the design review ordinance, changed code to be able to streamline properties process to be able to raise homes. So to really exempt from a full design review process if they're able to adhere to certain standards. So as part of that, we always miss something. And in this case, it's already emerged that there is a change that we would have recommended, and that is to allow extended decks on bayfront property. So those that are along the bay, they're still limited on the FAR and decks just as any other property. But in the perimeter properties, this is their only usable area in their backyards. So the request from a homeowner was to allow for extended decks or just flexibility on being able to, when you raise a home, being able to expand the deck area. And so that is something that we're putting out here that we'd hope to get direction on to be able to focus on that for 2025. There may be other things related to that ordinance that we need to change. So generally, after we write an ordinance, we don't want to go right back in immediately because there's always other things that pop up because it's an iterative process. And if we didn't hear from people during that outreach process and hear about things later, we want to be able to change those things all at one time. So that's one piece that we're hoping to get direction on. I talked about the short-term rental ordinance and potential amendments there. And then also there's new housing legislation that we need to look at. So there's some changes to SB 9. There's a new bill, SB 1123, that actually is similar to SB 9, but could potentially allow more lots depending on the size of the lot. So, and I think we're missing a couple other ones as well. So there's going to be a need to come back, do another ordinance related to housing legislation that happened this last year. And then another piece is, although we're updating our building and permit fees for building planning, we also have impact fees and inclusionary housing fee and a commercial linkage fee. All of these need to be reviewed. And so it's our hope that after the building and planning fee update that we can really start taking a look at our impact fees, which are a little bit of a heavier lift, but really need to be reviewed because it really is one of the key factors to facilitating affordable housing and being able to provide clarity and certainty to applicants who are looking at housing. So with that, I will welcome any feedback that you have on any of those items. And then also encourage you to open the public hearing because I think we do have someone who'd like to speak on this too.
Yes, thank you. This gentleman is here to make a public comment. Is that correct? Please, so step right up and let's hear what you have to say. Certainly.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So good evening. My name is Eric Bitso. I'm the owner and resident along with my wife Teal and our 3-year-old daughter Lily at 299 Goldenheim Passage in Mariner Cove. I'm here to respectfully voice our support for adding the item that Amy just described with respect to allowing raised homes to also raise extended decks on Bayfront Marsh property and include that in the 2025 town work plan. Resolution of this issue is needed to enable flood and property damage mitigation efforts to proceed for homes like ours that are on the front lines of seawater incursion. As you likely know, our neighborhood and indeed our street specifically has been the subject of much discussion around needed flood risk and climate adaptation measures. I brought a picture this evening that's taken straight from the town's recent video on the issue, and which our house is shown and noted here with a red arrow. This picture reflects what currently happens at high tides occurring numerous times throughout the year. You can see the seawater incursion reaches all the way to about the top of our lower deck, which sits not quite 2 feet above the grade. As a result, and unsurprisingly, the underneath structure of our deck regularly sits in the seawater and incurring significant damage, degradation, and that's without any major storms or wind activity increasing the tide. So on top of what we currently face, the town is using estimates of potentially another 1.5 feet or so of water in the coming years due to sea level rise and climate change. Right now, the only option for homeowners in our situation is to pay out of our own pockets to try to lift our homes and structures up out of the water. And frankly, that's all my family and I are trying to do. We are not seeking to in any way add structures or addition to our existing footprint or to make any other improvements to our property. So this last year with our contractor, we submitted plans to lift both the house and connected decks together in lockstep, approximately 32 inches. But as we've been told, lifting the deck up out of the water in that way would violate existing lot coverage limits in the code and potentially setback requirements, given that anything above 3 feet can trigger those restrictions. The existing 3-foot limitation is frankly nowhere near enough to get decks and the support structures up out of the water to stop the property damage that's already happening. It's certainly not enough to protect against the sea level rise that we've been advised to plan for. And as Amy described, without the deck, we have no backyard. We would have no usable space due to the water incursion. So this is an issue that's central to those of us that are along the bay side of the Golden Hind Passage. So we're simply asking tonight for support towards a common sense solution that allows us to lift our home and the existing attached deck to get them up out of the water in tandem, and no more than that, so that we can meet the challenges we're facing right now, and that we understand are only going to get worse. We love our home, we love our community, and want to be here forever. So I'd also like to point out that we've spoken with Amy and Martha and Tracy, and they've all been incredibly helpful and supportive. And we thank them for their thoughtfulness on this issue, and we thank you all for listening.
Okay, well, question for you. What is the nav elevation of your property?
So we did have a certificate, a elevation certificate done, and the floor level of our house is about 9.5. Down by the water though, where the deck is, it's probably closer to 6. The grade slopes down towards the bay a little bit. And the bottom deck that really is the issue is it's sitting on grade, but of course, you need structure to be able to support the deck. So without, nearly 2 feet of structure, it's sitting, just above probably 7 feet now. It's really hard to tell because, the peak king tides are about 7.3. You can see on the water, the deck gets up to about the top of the lower deck, but it never comes over. So that's why I say, probably just above 7 feet now. Be my estimate.
This is sort of because we're in this sort of informal discussion here, I can ask these questions.
Sure, please.
But have you been to the various committees that talk about the possible use of materials to help protect your strip of homes and so forth?
Yes, absolutely. We've been we bought the house in 2020. I've been attending looking at this issue even before we bought the house and attending flood board meetings. Sachi and Kirk are our neighbors, and we speak with them regularly. So yeah, yes, we've been monitoring. My understanding of those issues, including from the flood board members, is that we're not likely to see resolution for a number of years. Frankly, we've had a number of close calls, not necessarily with respect to water getting into our house. We've had flooding in our garage, but it's gotten close enough to where we'd like to probably act sooner rather than later. And, we're seeing climate events all over the country and all over the world that are meeting the 100-year flood threshold that FEMA set. So, it's not, the flood nav is 10 feet. Our floors are about 9.5. So we don't feel a huge urgency, but we don't want to wait.
It's coming. Yeah. Okay. You guys have any other questions for this gentleman? No. Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
See a practical need here that's occurring. Thank you. So that's I want to use some of the dredging to put out there. I'm just kidding. Okay. That said, do you guys have any comments for staff, or is there anybody online that wants to pop their hand up about this item?
Yeah, I do have one hand raised online. I'm going to allow you to unmute, Kirk. Looks like you're unmuted, but we aren't able to hear you, Kirk.
Can you hear me now?
Oh, yep. Now we can hear you.
Okay, great. Yeah. This is actually Sachi Blackie. Kirk Miller is my husband. I'm also a member of the flood board. And I want to support action of using deck as basically the only livable kind of outdoor space that many of us have. So. And I'm at 323 Golden Hunt, right by the stormwater pump station.
Okay, yeah, I know about where that is. So, okay. You're good friends with Dr. Bundy?
Yes, I am.
Good. Okay. Great to hear this practical case. Thank you for commenting, right? So goes into the record. Thank you, Sachi.
I have a question for Amy. on the
Yes.
Work plan. On the work plan, Amy, the tree canopy and coverage, how, I think particularly street trees can have a major significant impact on the quality of the visual quality of the town and so forth. So how do you anticipate engaging the planning commission? Since I actually think it's a planning issue as well as a horticultural issue as well as environmental issue.
That's unknown at this point. So the piece that's in our current work plan is actually from the Climate Action Committee. And so there needs to be some more visioning around what programs or what ordinance changes the committee would like to see happen. So we would certainly include you all once we had that more adapted in a way that you could make some informed decisions on, or some direction. That may be a study session of some kind. But we don't have anything absolute on that.
Okay, thank you.
Margaret,
I have a suggestion.
of course.
It's a practical one, and it's one that I'll openly admit affects me every single day. I'd like to see some kind of regulation or requirement in the building code or the permitting code that requires that once somebody gets a permit, the structure is actually constructed and livable within a certain amount of time. I don't know what would be practical, but the 159 Prince Royal Drive has been in process for 8 years now and still not livable. So I think that's unreasonable for the people next door and me across the street to have to put up with building for 8 years.
That's a great comment. Yes, I know there's some other jurisdictions that have regulations that do put time limits on the amount of time for construction. So we can look into that and move that forward as an option.
Yeah, I agree with you, Margaret. And the problem becomes permit renewals. And then what does that mean for requirements for permit renewals? And when does that end? And Tiburon has fought with that recently on some projects. People face fines in Belvedere, et cetera. So, it's a tricky navigation to put limitations on there without. But it becomes apparent that the applicant has to have their act together and plans done to a certain point before they initiate, if possible. Yeah. I have a couple other things I want to ask you about. Priority Sites grant, is that the same grant system that the gym guys did not get funding for their property, or is it different?
We submitted 2 applications. We received funding for one of them, which is the Pfeiffer Nellen site, which is owned by Sebastian Djokovic. So we
Yeah.
got the 75,000 for that particular site.
All right. At some point, they were denied something, or one didn't make it.
The Macy site did not receive funding, unfortunately.
Okay. Thanks for that clarity on that. On trees, a number of years ago, there was discussions in various committees about what trees were going to be on the acceptability list. And various town committees were saying this should or shouldn't be included. And I don't know where it stands with regurgitating those lists of trees and that history of trees that have been so thoroughly discussed in past years. It's been a long path, but I think it's been dropped in recent times. The second part that comes with that is the sidewalk program, right? So when I walk around town at 5 a.m., I trip over a lot of sidewalks. I don't know what's happened to that program. And offering up some replacement aid.
I don't know, but we can look into that.
Yeah.
But Tracy has been working on the tree issue if she's willing to give an update.
We have been working with the town's arborist on some appropriate street trees. Those street trees, we're looking at our multiple considerations on what to select from native and pollinators to suitable for our infrastructure underneath our streets and sidewalks, as well as the sidewalk itself, their ability to be positioned underneath power lines, their maintenance requirements, their speed with which they grow, aesthetics, those kinds of things. That list is in draft form. With the climate adaptation coordinator, we've been working on that to sort of promote and accelerate folks planting street trees to increase the canopy of trees in Corte Madera. The sidewalk program is still happening. I don't know the area of town they're working on right now, but Dimitri Copeland is still working on that. There are a lot of individual sidewalk replacements that and the town offers up some funds to match the contribution of the homeowner. And that includes tree removal and tree replacement, as well as the sidewalk work itself. That is a pilot program. So whether or not that'll be extended to finish quote unquote all the sidewalks and then like the Golden Gate Bridge, start back over at the beginning, remains to be seen, but it's still available to property owners. I think not really sure the most recent area that Public Works has done.
In other communities, the towns say if you don't do it by a certain date, we'll do it and charge you for it.
I think we're looking at more of the carrot than the stick in this.
Benevolent method. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think we used to be more of a code enforcement issue, or required when you develop your property to fix any broken sidewalk or offset sidewalk. And now I think Public Works is focusing more on making sure that when we're requiring it or when there's a program going down the street, that the town is contributing to that in some way.
Got it. Okay. Penalty fees. That goes into the fee schedule program, or it sounds like you have a separate program for developing penalty fees.
Yeah, there's a separate area of code other than our zoning code that has the provisions for penalties and fines, administrative citations. And so our hope is to just be able to revisit that. So we can create penalties and fees that are more appropriate to the situation.
Goes with the commentary of not completing the project in time, right? As well, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then so heat pump ordinance, does that mean relaxing of noise standards at all, or just keeping those and just creating an acceptability of it in the side yards?
We haven't researched it thoroughly yet, but my guess is we'll create standards and they'll have to show that the whatever mechanism is going to meet those standards, including noise.
Yeah. You guys never got any state aid in determining transit stop development?
No, sir.
And I'm just curious, when you say workforce housing, that's lovely. I don't know what that. That's a challenge to say, okay, does that mean then that some part of your department is to go out and look for people who will develop workforce housing?
There's an array of options. So what I think this is doing is just to explore what options are feasible. And so right now we're looking at what other jurisdictions have as far as programs and what might be a good start for us to explore.
And lastly, what does 1123 say?
I have to look at it again. But I think it's, you remember?
It's on multifamily zoned properties that you can subdivide and create up to 10 lots. And now that it's been, our single family zoning has been added to that. I mean, the lot needs to be vacant and greater than an acre. Right? Yes.
Okay.
It doesn't go into effect until July of next year. So this is very new. And I think there's a lot of jurisdictions that are just starting to grapple with what this means.
Yeah, I get it. But it stumped the panel. It's great. The two encyclopedia girls here.
But I think that item is really just to show we've got a lot of new state laws that continue to be developed related to housing that's going to require us to create new regulations or amend the ones we have.
Oh, thank you. Does anybody else have any commentary about their work plan and so forth? No. Okay, well, I'm doing fine because I'm on 17 hours in advance. So, okay. Okay, with that said, anything else you want to report or tell us about?
Oh, you mean, are we moving to reports?
Yeah, let's move on to reports. I think we're done there, right?
All right, sounds good. Yeah, thank you for your input. Just a few things. One, the Our House Furniture Store opened in Town Center. So there was a ribbon cutting and grand opening on Friday. So please go check that out. It's beautiful. And then the other thing well, this might come up in your reports, but last Tuesday at the town council, or actually last Monday, it was moved from Tuesday due to the election. We talked about micro businesses and a new program to start in Menke Park. And so that would include the allowance of a food truck or coffee cart in Menke Park as a pilot program for 1 year. So we discussed that with the council and got an acceptance on that program. So we'll be launching that very soon. And the only other thing is that you may have heard, but the Best Western Hotel, that site is up for sale. So we are fielding a lot of questions about what potentials could happen with that site. And we also have the church site, Holy Innocents Church, that is up for sale as well. So we're very busy replying, or that Martha and Tracy are very busy replying to questions related to those two sites and what's possible.
So the permit goes up in smoke.
It's still active, so still has another year or so on that permit.
Look at that.
Garrett said, I'm out. Okay. That's information I didn't know. Thank you for that. Yeah. All the hard work everybody put in on that now becomes more hard work. So, I don't know if I dare ask, but as part of planning, now that that's up, then the strip along Tamil Vista that was dedicated to that segment of Tamil Vista for street improvement stays intact. And is there any plan for continuing that down Tamil Vista in your work plan?
No, we did not contemplate that. So all those requirements are still in place and would be part of any development that would happen along that corridor.
Commissioners, do you guys have anything to report?
I don't.
Okay. So then the last bit of business would be that we have some minutes to look at. Um, Margaret, you were not here. I guess we can't really vote because we don't have a threesome for those minutes. So, right, so we'll have put those to next week, next meeting, whatever that might be. November what, 20?
So we are hoping to cancel the next meeting, which is the Tuesday before Thanksgiving. And so the next potential meeting is December 10th. So we may have an item or two, but it's unclear at this time.
Okay. All right, shall we go home? Let's adjourn this meeting. Thank you very much.